Hi Pinkies! Welcome to another Storytime Saturday. I hope the audio won't be too windy. If it is, I'll try and voice this over, okay? So today I wanted to talk about traditions. And to start, I thought it'd be nice to share one of my traditions with you. So here we're at one of my favorite trees in the whole world. It's a tree that's really far away from my uncle's farm. It's way out in the middle of a field, and for some reason nobody cut it down. So it's this lone tree that just kind of sits there. It's a great goal to walk all the way to it. The whole time you're walking, you can see it, and it's just right there. And so it really encourages you to make it all the way through. I only come to visit my uncle's farm maybe 3 times a year, but every time I do, I make sure to visit this tree. Traditions are strange. They're almost like a compulsion. They're responsible for so many unconscious or sometimes conscious beliefs that we hold in our lives. And on top of all of that, they're also a great storytelling device. I want to split. Usually in storytelling, when we talk about stories, we try and put them into Western and Eastern categories. And that's because our cultural influences have affected the way that we've told stories in a lot of different ways. For example, if we look at Japan, Tale of the Bamboo Cutter is one of the oldest stories known to that culture. Because of that, you can see how its roots are implanted in almost every story, at least in some way. Some of those are tropes, and I wouldn't go so far as to say that it influences every single Japanese story, but you can see echoes of it through lots of media in Japan. Bamboo Cutter starts with a bamboo cutter, and he's cutting down bamboo, and he finds a child in one of the bamboo that he cuts down. He brings the child home, and this elderly couple raises it. As she grows older, they try and make her a princess because she's some kind of moon god. And because of this, eventually the moon takes her back away because we never deserved having her in the first place. When I was reciting this story, Superman comes to mind. All-Star Superman is one of the most famous stories because it summarizes Superman's story in 4 panels. It's a really interesting way to summarize Superman's story. He's this otherworldly being who's presented to an old couple who raises them as their own, and because of his human ideals, he becomes an icon for us. He becomes even more human than we were. Tradition influences Superman to become the person that he is. And if he had stayed on Krypton, he would have held much different beliefs and morals than he would have here. In Star Wars, there's a race of people that is extremely good at cloning. Kaminoans. Anyways. A lot of the beliefs that are held by Kaminoans sort of exemplify what we fear culture might become without tradition and without morals. In the same way, Kryptonians have a slightly different view of the same thing. On Kamino, children are no longer born. They are cloned, and they are selected a role, and they live that role throughout society. This is lore that George Lucas himself didn't write, but when looking at Attack of the Clones using that lens, you can tell that a lot of the way that he framed shots, and especially color graded it, made this world feel extremely futuristic, but at the same time, very bland. If we look back at Kryptonians now, you can see that Zack Snyder almost tried to make the Kryptonians believers in evolution in every sense. And that way, they've become controlling of evolution. Like on Kamino, every child born on Krypton has a designated role that they were born for. Superman's father asks the question, what if a child wants to be more? What if a child wants to be something different? He is defying his own traditions in a way that really helps us as an audience root for him. He is going against his own culture's tradition, but he's instead embracing a tradition that relates to us. A lot of Western writing draws some of its influence from biblical narratives. This is a really powerful tool because some biblical events are based on historical truths, but more importantly, a lot of the audience already believes these things to be true. So echoing these ideas, these characters, these thoughts, works to win over your audience. As a creator, manipulation is a lot of what you're doing. Not only are you directing your art, but you're also directing your audience to feel a certain way. If we use this lens to look at modern-day comic book movies, we can see that a lot of the beliefs that we've always held are still portrayed in these heroes. Marvel has done a great job of keeping these values in their characters, at the same time using modern sensibilities to make those characters likable. If we look at some of these traditional values, a lot of them are based on xenophobia and a need to stay in the pack. These are survivalist beliefs that have kept us alive since the birth of humanity. But now that humanity is a star-faring race that already conquered our planet, some of these beliefs don't make too much sense anymore. Patriotism is still alive and well, and it's fine if Superman wears the stars and stripes. But if he exemplified some of those colonist personality traits, he wouldn't be as likable anymore. That's why our superheroes have sort of a quippy, fun attitude, yet exemplify these traditional beliefs. To me, I think more interesting stories can be found when veering away from tradition, when trying to create something out of your own heart. It's very hard to parse out what ideas have already been influenced in your brain by what you've grown up around. So I've already talked about it a little bit, but let's get a little more into tradition and storytelling. Oftentimes, tradition can be seen in a story as something that is very good, but maybe a teeny bit wrong. And by the end of the story, after the character has experienced some growth, the traditions can be expanded. If we look at How to Train Your Dragon, we can see this occurring again. And I hate to use the same examples that I always do, but it's a very good example. At the beginning of the story, the Vikings hate dragons. Hiccup agrees with this notion, but as he becomes more close to his own dragon, he decides that this is wrong. And by the end of the story, with a lot of sacrifice, new traditions have been formed, and the dragons are no longer looked at as something to kill, but as friends. It's hard to tell a story that a tradition completely changes, and the Vikings are still very much Vikings. A lot of their traditions carry on because not every one of their beliefs is wrong, only that they kill dragons. To look at Star Wars again, George Lucas uses a lot of our cultural traditions and morals to enhance his story. If we look at sci-fi writing, it's always been sort of a pendulum, and up until the 70s, it got extremely psychedelic and sort of intangible for the normal everyday reader. It wasn't until 77 when Star Wars came out that all of the sci-fi genre, including in literature, was sort of revamped and rebooted. George Lucas sort of changed the idea of what sci-fi can be. Star Wars really is science fantasy. Star Wars is an anomaly. In a lot of ways, I do love the way that it uses tradition. Sometimes these traditions can be a little problematic, and those are the ones that I want to explore in our last category. One theme that I've been grappling with in storytelling recently is the idea of forgiveness. Forgiveness is something that we value a lot in Western culture. As humans, we only live one life that we know of, and because of this, everyone should have some forgiveness so that they can live their lives without spending a lot of it groveling over whatever mistakes they've made. At the same time, not everyone deserves forgiveness, and lots of people who have done just abhorrent things don't deserve any kind of forgiveness. Heartstopper really has me grappling with this idea because there's a character in Heartstopper who bullies Charlie. Because of this, he asks for forgiveness, and Alice Oseman takes a really interesting route. She decides to let Charlie not forgive him. In fact, even makes a point to have Charlie say he doesn't deserve his forgiveness. Just because he's become a better person doesn't mean he deserves anything. Alice Oseman is disagreeing with a lot of the traditions that Westerners value. This character did bully Charlie, but generally we forgive anybody who isn't a murderer. It's an interesting idea, and if you really evaluate it, it's a little bit scary. If you think about Star Wars again, at the end of the original trilogy, Luke forgives Vader, his father, who is also a mass murderer, and with each decade of more Star Wars content, we learn more and more of the atrocities he's committed. So should we really be teaching kids to forgive everyone, even a murderer as heinous as Darth Vader? I don't know. The other thing that made me interested in this is watching the sequel trilogy, because at the end of that trilogy, there's also a big forgiveness of the villain. But in this case, Kylo Ren has done nothing to deserve this. Vader hasn't really either, but somehow it makes me question the idea even more. I think part of the reason why is George Lucas is very good at manipulating his audience. And the same way that he is good at using music and all of these other things, he also instructed Darth Vader's actor to die and to be sort of whimpering and helpless. Because of this, you're much more likely to forgive him. I'm not going to come to a direct conclusion of whether I think that forgiveness is right in every story, but when you're writing a story, remember, you need to figure that out right now. Do you want your character to be forgiven? Because if you do, you need to direct your readers and your audience as such. Steven Universe is one of my favorite examples of forgiveness being a little bit misused, because I've always loved Steven Universe. One thing that's great about it is the main character, Steven, is just so wholesome that almost every single villain in the series gets a redemption, because he's just so friendly, he's so loving, that he'll give anybody a second chance. He'll show anybody the right way to do things. Rebecca Sugar, the creator of Steven Universe, has sort of expanded on these ideas and said that he hasn't truly forgiven the main villains of the story because he is quite a bit uneasy, especially in his later years when his childhood happiness is a little bit waning. Still, again, a little bit scary, especially when the audience for Rebecca Sugar's creation is queer kids. At the same time, I do want a society where everyone gets forgiveness, everyone has another chance. Again, we're all humans, and I think that all humans have the capacity to change and become better. Forgiveness is sort of a moral hole that I find myself swirling around a lot. I'd love to know your thoughts about this in the comments. Well, that's all I've got for today. I hope that you enjoyed this one. I hope the audio was somewhat hearable, and I'd love to hear another topic for me to explore in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye, Pinkies!